welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sophie Lambin, and I'm the editorial partner for the Women's Forum for the Economy and Society. At the Women's Forum, we believe that women's voices and vision are crucial to building an inclusive future. In collaboration with the New York Times, we are delighted to be hosting a series of conversations with women leaders. These conversations bring to light the fresh ideas and new models of powerful and purposeful leadership which we so need in a post-COVID world. Our speakers are women from around the world, women on the front lines, women leading with both their power and their strong sense of purpose through the recovery and for a she recovery that will benefit all. Today, we'll have what promises to be a lively exchange with a speaker who will reveal the entrenched bias and barriers women face even in the highest ranks of political leadership. And we will explore what this means for governance and democratic institutions now and in the future. A quick note on audience questions. We will be taking as many as we can through the live chat on the right of your screen, so please submit them. You can also follow our conversation on social media with the hashtag, in her words, Women's Forum and She Recovery. And now I'm very pleased to welcome Francesca Donner, Gender Director of the New York Times, who will lead today's conversation. Francesca, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sophie. Well, I am thrilled beyond words to introduce the Honourable Julia Gillard. As a way of introduction, if you'll humour me, I'd like to begin with a game. Or it would be a game if the stakes weren't so high. I'm going to start reading a list of names and, well, I think you'll figure it out. Are you ready? Edmund, Alfred, John, George, Andrew, Joseph, William, Stanley, James, Joseph, Earl, Robert, Arthur, John, Frank, Joseph, Harold, John, William, Goff, that's Edward, Malcolm, Robert, Paul, John, Kevin, Julia, Tony, Malcolm, and Scott. If it wasn't clear, I was reading the first names of all the people who've been Prime Minister of Australia, in case you didn't notice. And that wasn't even listing those people who had had multiple terms. Now, since this is a game, remember I said it was a game, did any of those names stand out from the pack for you? If you guessed Julia, that's what I was thinking too. The Honourable Julia Gillard, our guest today, served as the 27th Prime Minister of Australia and leader of the Labour Party from 2010 to 2013. She is the only woman to have served as Prime Minister of Australia, in case that was not completely obvious. And while I am happy to say, well, at least there has been one, I am sorry to say, well, there has been only one. Today, we're going to talk about women and leadership, a topic about which she is a true expert, not because she has just written a book, well, in part because she's just written a book, which is Women in Leadership, which is by her and co-author Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, but because she has lived it. While Prime Minister, she focused on so many things, including building back the economy. She put the spotlight on education. She channeled resources into healthcare and climate and immigration, all while enduring personal criticism, personal insults, and scrutiny about her outfits, and right up to the appearance of her earlobes. Yes, you actually heard that correctly. Is that just the way it has to be for female leaders? Today, she chairs the Global Institute of Women's Leadership at King's College, London. And Julia, I am so glad you are here, and it is such a pleasure.
Terrific to be with you, Francesca, and thank you for that fantastic introduction. I enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed the list. I'd like to actually begin by speaking with you a little bit about, you've certainly written about this in your book, and I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the double standard on leadership, and frankly, that's going to be the thread that carries this whole conversation. But last November, you and I chatted about leadership, and at the time you told me, and I'll quote you here, I don't think we should put the case for women's leadership on the foundation stone that women leaders are always better, because if we do that, we are kind of baking the sexism in. Why is this a dangerous route, Julia?
I think it is a dangerous route. I know, and I myself use statistics that point to the fact that women leading businesses can often mean that businesses are more profitable. We've all, I think, been very happy to see the dialogue around women in leadership and COVID, and the various research pieces that have shown that countries led by women leaders have done comparatively better in combating the virus. So it's not that that kind of material doesn't in some way gladden our hearts. But if we end up using that material as the case for women's leadership, then what we're effectively saying is women should be leaders because they will be better than men. And if we're saying, well, a woman can only get to the top if she's going to be amazing, then that necessarily means that we won't see 50% of women coming to the top. You know, what percentage of leaders are amazing? 10%, 15%, 20%, you can come up with your own number, but we will be confining women to that amazing slice. Meanwhile, the rest will be taken by some amazing men, but many mediocre men as well. So I think we've got to put the case for women's leadership on a moral basis, particularly in politics, because really what sort of democracy is it that says that you get the ability to vote, but you don't have a fair chance of becoming the person who is voted for and gets to lead? So we've got to open that conversation up. I firmly believe that talent is equally distributed between men and women. If we want to see institutions that represent people and represent that talent base, and it's that moral case that we should put first, and then put the various research pieces about how women can do better, leading with strength and empathy when they get there.
I wonder if I would like to just push you a second on the moral argument for having more female leaders. If you can just kind of carry that through to your conclusions, so people really understand what you're getting at there. Is that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to keep on this topic because I think it's a really important one. When I put the case for women in leadership, I start with saying it is morally right that a girl, a woman, should have a fair and equal chance of ending up being Prime Minister, President, CEO, leader of the Defence Force, leader of a civil society organisation, whatever area of leadership we're talking about. Putting that case morally as a question of right and justice, I think then means that we're opening up the conversation as broadly as we need to. We aren't saying select a woman only when she's demonstrably better. We're saying let's fairly select women all of the time. And if we do that, then I think we are saying to girls that your life chances are truly equal. You don't have to be some incredible trailblazer who smashes glass ceilings in your wake. You can have an expectation that as many doors are open to you as are open to the boys that you're in school with.
Right. In other words, everyone gets to play. It's immoral not to allow everyone to get to play. I think that's what I'm hearing here. And I think that seems about right.
It's immoral, certainly, to put artificial barriers based around gender and gender discrimination in people's way. Absolutely.
Or other bizarre things that we put barriers up against, and race and other things too, age, goodness knows what else. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's talk about COVID for a few minutes. To me, one of the refrains from the past year has been COVID. Who handled it better? Did female leaders outperform male leaders? Anecdotally, I feel like we've heard time and time again, oh yes, female leaders did so much better. So actually, I came across two academics in the UK, Uma Kapambati and Supriya Garikapati. They decided to crunch the numbers, and what their data, instead of just saying, okay, sure, anecdotally, whatever, they decided to crunch the numbers. And what their data showed is that female leaders really did outperform male leaders on COVID. And they compared sort of like countries with like countries, so that you weren't comparing sort of a huge country with a lot of money to a small country with not much money, or a country with a huge population versus a country with a small population. And they found that female leaders really did outperform male leaders, in part because they took much more decisive action when locking down, among other things. And I'm curious, I recognize I'm really putting you on the spot because you probably have not seen this research, but what do you make of research like this? Is it fair to genderize leadership in this way?
I am aware of that research, and I was really delighted to see it, because when this dialogue started about countries led by women are doing better, I must admit I was a little suspicious of it. Suspicious because the statistician in me wanted to say too small a sample size, and isn't that telling you something just in its own right, that the sample size of the number of women who lead countries in the world is really too small to draw too many conclusions based on? That's exactly what we're trying to fix. And then I thought, well, are we comparing like with like? Because it's obviously, we can't compare countries like Germany and New Zealand with countries with less resources, and in New Zealand's case, potentially less ability to close their borders. New Zealand, of course, like Australia, being an island nation, so you can close the borders, not without economic dislocation, but physically you can close the borders with comparative ease. So I was very grateful to those British researchers when they moved beyond anecdote to evidence and started comparing like country with like country. And the conclusion I took away from that is, in many ways, what that research was telling us is that the style of leadership that has most failed during the pandemic is the ultra macho, swaggering style of leadership. And, you can name any leaders yourself that you think fall into this space. But the men who at the start of the pandemic were like, that little virus isn't going to get me. I'm still going to wander around doing everything that I do, and it's not any different to the common flu, and, we'll be all right. And most of those male leaders, here we are a year later, and they've had the virus themselves because of their swaggering conduct and not listening to the evidence, and their countries have done comparatively worse. And so it's that ultra macho, blustering style of leadership. You might be able to bluster your way through a lot of political problems. You can't bluster your way in the face of a virus. It's not interested in all of your sort of swaggering conduct. And so that does mean, I think, that women who have come through in politics, because we only give women political permission to come through as leaders if they manage to combine strength and empathy. As voters, the research clearly shows we reject women we think are too weak to lead. We reject women who we think have given up on the female traits of nurturing and empathy. So you come through as a woman leader if you've combined strength and empathy, and they've been great traits in the face of the virus. The strength that it takes to listen to the scientists and to do the hard things early, but also the empathy so that your population knows you feel it, you get it. You're not just imposing rules on them. You're understanding their pain, their isolation, their frustration, their fatigue, as people have had to live with those rules for many, many months now.
Right. I'm so glad you mentioned the macho. I feel us swinging in our chairs as we say macho, swaggering leadership. Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that, to your point, I think that COVID has really sort of shown into stark relief what the markers of what a leader is, right? So you have the sort of powerful and commanding and tough, these sort of quote unquote male traits on one side, and then, empathetic, compassionate, humble, the traits we might view as more female. And what I'd love to hear from you, clearly over the past year, these sort of more quote unquote female traits have had a good and positive impact. But do you think that's here to stay? What I would love to hear is, do you think COVID has changed and will forever have changed how we view leadership, or what we'll look for or expect or even accept in our leaders going forward? Or do you think we're going to sort of bounce back to sort of the hierarchical sort of big boss, big man on campus model? What's your view on that? Are we strong enough to move forward to the empathetic model of leadership?
My answer is I hope so, but in many ways, I think this is still to play for, still something that we've got to push for if we're going to see. I mean, we have seen around the world, and particularly in the US, the consequences of that ultra male style of leadership, and it's had a political price, as we've seen President Trump not re-elected. But whether we're going to recalibrate our vision of leadership and that recalibration is going to stay with us, I don't know yet. I think that there are some things coming out of the pandemic which mean that if we can pick them up and build on them, then we can build a better and more gender equal future. One of the things to build on are these new perceptions around leadership, strength and empathy. Another thing to build on, in my view, is our new perceptions around caring work. I mean, let's face it, in all of our societies for decades, caring work has been looked down on, it's been underpaid, it's been viewed as women's work. And now in the pandemic, people have put carers on a pedestal. People have been out clapping for the NHS, for example, in the UK, and doing the same thing to applaud their healthcare and caring workers in other countries. If we can take out of this a re-evaluation of caring work, if we can take out of this a reworking of work environments where work can be performed virtually and flexibly. I mean, many women will have had the experience during this pandemic where they've been asking for flexible and virtual work, and the boss has been saying, not possible, not possible, not possible. And guess what? When you had to do it, it all was possible, and we've been doing it for the best part of a year now. If we can take the best of that into the future, I think we can re-gear the world of work. And so I also hope if we can take a sense of global solidarity with us into the future, the fact that we are now increasingly understanding, particularly with the mutations of the virus, that none of us is safe until all of us is safe, which is why it's so important to get vaccines to everyone in the world, not just the countries who can get themselves at the front of the queue because they can pay the most for them. If we can take those things with us and build on them, then I think we can shape a better future. But will it necessarily happen? No, it's not self-correcting, it's not self-building. It's only going to happen if we're out there, women and men who support this cause of a better, more equal future, arguing for it, researching, putting the best evidence-based cases and really, really campaigning for it.
Wow, there were so many things there. I'd like to actually, if you don't mind, just go back to caring work for a moment, because to me, it's such an economic problem. And, I sort of feel like, okay, people have really had their eyes open, but our governments, and of course, recognizing not all countries are the same and have different priorities, but, our governments, our leaders ready to put their money where their mouth is and say, well, my gosh, these things are so essential. Why are they making such low salaries, or in fact, or even no salaries, or sort of looking at some of these absolutely profoundly important jobs that frankly keep the economy in the sort of fancy GDP sense humming. What are we going to do about that? Can we put our money where our mouth is? What would you say to leaders to get this done? I mean, is it just an economic thing the way I look at it, or is it much more than that?
Well, I think it's much more than that, but in this world, I think the case that's going to be persuasive is the economic case. If I can hark back to one thing we did when I was Prime Minister, we re-geared our workplace relations laws so that we had a better equal pay principle. And under that equal pay principle, community and social sector workers, so I'm talking here about social workers in particular, that's predominantly women's work in Australia. I suspect it's predominantly women's work around the world. These are women who hold university degrees, they've studied social work or an allied qualification, and when an analysis was done of their pay, they were routinely paid 30-40% less than degree holders with comparable levels of responsibility in other industries. And that got fixed through our equal pay principle and through the actions of our government in supporting the pay increases, because many of these people are employed by things funded by government. Even if they're in the not-for-profit sector, they get some government funding. And so the undervaluing of caring work is it's not a marginal thing. It's not a little sliver. If we analyse profession by profession in the caring industries, I think we would find that it's a profound amount of money. I think the economic case, which is going to get the attention of government, is everyone at the end of this pandemic is going to be saying to themselves, what did we do to bolster our preparedness for a next time? No one is going to leave their country unprepared for a future pandemic. And being prepared requires you to have a healthcare system that can operate in ordinary times when people get sick, in all the multiple ways that people get sick and injured in the human experience, but can also surge during pandemic times. And that is going to require funding and building a workforce. And you're only going to hold that workforce at the levels that you need it if they're viewed as good jobs. And in all of the countries around the world, I'm sure that this is true. It's certainly true in Australia. There are tens of thousands, probably millions of people who are qualified in healthcare professions, nursing and the like, who no longer work in it because they can earn more money, have more respect, have a more flexible working life, an easier working life doing something else. Well, if we maintain that paradigm, then it's always going to mean that we're sort of stretching underfunded, understaffed healthcare services because we're not retaining the workforce we need. So I think there is a good economic case, but of course there's a moral case. This is hard work, which we know when times are tough is the work we most need performed. I mean, who got us through this pandemic? You're from the New York Times. It wasn't the brokers in Wall Street who got us through. It was the carers in care homes, in the hospital sector, and in so much more of the caring professions that has kept our society going.
Yeah. I want to draw out one point that's actually quite connected. It's going to take us on a tangent, but I think it will be fun. You mentioned these women who are going to look at the profession and say, you know what, it's not worth it. I'd rather be elsewhere. And I think that that's so true for so many women looking at certain professions, and in particular, politics is a good one. It's absolutely torturous for many women, unless you're ready to be scrutinized and trolled and commented upon, your clothes, everything, your earlobes. I can't even, I don't even have words for that. But I think, I think a lot about sort of women who might look at that as a possible avenue and then say, it's not worth it. The stakes are simply too high, and I'm not ready to sort of drag myself through that or my family through that. And I'm going to just if you hold on to that point, I'm going to combine it to an audience question. And this question, and I think really sort of goes with it, which is, what is your advice to female politicians or leaders on how to face violence against women in politics? So I think let's kind of pull these threads together and think about, I want to think about how, torturous it can be. Yes, of course, rewarding. Yes, profoundly important. Yes, we need more women in these leadership positions, and yet incredibly frustrating. And let's kind of frame this through this it's from Abir Chabaro. Let's frame it through Abir's question of, what do we say to young up and coming or even older women who are sort of thinking yes but no? How do you think about that?
It's a really good question, and I'll come specifically to the violence point, but if I could start with the broader point. When Ngozi and I were writing the book, we were really, really conscious that we want to analyse the gender barriers that are still there in the way of women. We want to, we wanted to bring the global research, the experience of 8 women leaders, and really unpack all of that. But we were really conscious that as we did that, we could be putting women off. And we actually have a chapter in the book which we entitled The Role Modelling Riddle, which is that research tells us that if women who are leaders go and speak to younger women and say, oh, it's so hard, you don't know what it's like, it's just so tough, they'll put women off. Conversely, if they go to younger women and say, it's fine, it's easy, it's never worried me, you know, I can look at a million tweets that are all about, you know, killing me and raping me, and it just bounces off, I don't worry about any of that. And the young woman will say to herself, oh my God, she's amazing, but I could never be like her. So that puts her off. So what really role models the best is just this honesty in the middle that says, you know, there is joy in leadership, absolute joy in leadership. If I had a time machine and had to go back to the start of my political career, knowing that every moment was going to play out the same, would I do it? I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Absolutely, hands down, no worries. You know, I would go and do it again because it had so much joy putting my values into action, getting big things done that I really cared about and continue to care about. But yes, there was this gendered bit to face. So what are the strategies that we can give women to try and overcome that gender bit? And then second, in this sort of optimism space, the other thing that clearly came out in the book is it gets easier the more women get to the top. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who's a fantastic leader, she is absolutely clear that her experience is different because she's the third woman to lead her nation. New Zealand is one of only 2 nations on earth to have 3 women lead them. The other one's Iceland. And because 2 other women have led New Zealand, for Jacinda, it wasn't in her head, can a woman do this? She'd seen women do it. She'd seen Helen Clark do it for a decade. And it wasn't in the minds of the New Zealand population, can a woman do this? They'd seen a woman do it. And so that opened up more space for Jacinda to bring her unique, empathetic style of leadership to the job. That experience compared with women who smashed through or tried to smash through really hard glass ceilings to be the first. Think of Hillary Clinton trying to do it in the 2016 campaign in an atmosphere of acute hyperpartisanship. So it gets easier the more women who are there. So the message out of that has to be to the women listening and women beyond is go for it. We need more women to do this. And it's not some special class of women who go and do it. It's women exactly like you. On the violence point, though, this should concern all of us. It's an issue across politics for men and women. But we know from analysis of the social media environment that violent material is disproportionately directed towards women. And we know that violence doesn't just live online, it spills out into the real world, and it has claimed the lives of women. I'm thinking here of women like Jo Cox in the UK, who was killed when she was campaigning in her constituency. So doing something that politicians around the world do every day. I think we've got to be rigorous in pushing the social media companies to crack down on violence and abuse using their platforms. And we've got to have the conversation publicly about what more needs to be done to secure politicians as they go about their work. And different countries will have different challenges, different amplitudes of threat, but no one should be in a moment's fear because they choose to participate in their democracy in a visible way.
Yeah. I want to just think, you know, you of course picked out New Zealand and Iceland, both countries amazing for having multiple female leaders. But I want to sort of look at the rest of the world because, you know, it's clear, it's so obvious we don't have enough female leaders, obviously, if parity is the goal or a goal. But, you know, you're an example, Vice President Kamala Harris is another, and what we see, I think, is this sort of almost palpable sense of relief once finally a female leader is chosen. And it sort of feels like a box checked, or finally a country can sort of say, oh, well, we've been there and we've done that. And I wonder if you can get into some specifics about how do we make sure that when a woman is elected or appointed, the door doesn't swing shut behind her. when is Australia going to see another female prime minister? Who's going to follow Vice President Harris? And there's so many, I mean, we could go through so many examples of sort of been there, done that, one and done. Okay, thank goodness, you know, Australia's all set. But Australia's not all set. So what do you know? I know you sort of mentioned, well, we've got to really kind of show young women, look, this is who I am, this is what I do, talk to them. But what else specifically can we really do to make sure, you know, at all levels, it's not just kind of, oh, well, we've done that and we're fine now. We're not fine now.
No, we're not fine now. And I do think that there's, you know, we all celebrate the statistics when the number of women leaders go up, whether it's in politics or in business or whatever. But we can beguile ourselves between what I refer to as the stock and the flow questions. You know, you can look at the Fortune 500 companies and snapshot it and say, oh, the number of women's gone up. That's good. But it's, you know, what we're really saying is any time you looked at the Fortune 500 companies, 250 of them should be led by women. Any time you do that analysis. You mentioned the US, Vice President Harris. If we saw true gender equality in the US, that means that, you know, usually presidents serve for an 8-year term. That means if we war gamed the clock forward, we'd say, well, you know, a woman would serve for 8 years and then maybe there would be another woman. So there'd been 16 years when a woman led. Then maybe you'd have a man followed by a man, another 16 years, and then you'd be back to a woman. Like, that's very different from the US we see now. It's very different from every country on earth. You know, except I think New Zealand can proudly say in recent times that it's had the balance between Helen Clark, John Key, and then Jacinda and Iceland, but certainly it's not common. So, you know, that's how big our aspiration is, and we've got to keep that goal in mind. How do we get there? Well, if there was one, you know, click your fingers and it's done thing, we would have clicked our fingers and done it by now. It's a multiple of things and they're complicated. It's about the structures of political parties enabling women to come through and questions like affirmative action rules. It's about stereotypes that whisper in all our brains, not just some people's brains, all of our brains, that tell voters and media and others who commentate on and shape politics that a powerful, commanding woman is probably unlikable. She's probably a bit of a bitch. She's not the sort of person that you should vote for. It's all of us scanning through the New York Times and choosing to pick up the article that is about what Vice President Harris is wearing as opposed to what she said, because there was an article in the New York Times analysing her fashion. It's, you know, about all of us, whether when we see a critique starting of a female leader playing on sexist tropes, she's nasty, she's too ambitious, that we immediately push back and say, no, that's gendered. And one of the things that I was really happy to see is in this campaign that led to the election of President Biden and Vice President Harris, that there was instantaneous reaction when things were said about Kamala Harris, which was sexist or racist, using the hashtag #WeHaveHerBack. You know, so the first critique President Trump gave of before she was Vice President, Kamala Harris, now Vice President, the first critique he gave was, she's nasty. No one likes her. Well, this is, you know, 101 gendered insult. And people called it out and said he's only saying that because she's a woman and it's playing on sexist stereotypes and we shouldn't listen to it. So, you know, there's these multiple layers of things that we have to fix. Political structures that enable women to combine, women and men, but this particularly presses on women, the combination of work and family life. You know, unless we're acting on all these things, we're not going to make the big shifts, the big changes that we need to see.
Right. So much there. Okay, but don't be upset with me, but I have to pick up on that thread about fashion. Okay. I know there's a whole chapter in the book about the time that is devoted to appearance, and it's utterly frustrating. And there was a wonderful line from Hillary Clinton, who was spending an hour a day because she had to, because she can't go out with flippy floppy crazy hair and she's got to look the part, otherwise it's going to be discussed and all of this kind of thing. And therefore, all those hours that she was spending worrying about her hair or whatnot were hours that she wasn't preparing for her campaign. How unfair is that? On the other hand, in defense of the New York Times articles on fashion, I must say that fashion can be so interesting and powerful when you have people who use it so brilliantly to their advantage. And I kind of think of Madeleine Albright and her pins, which are so, every pin is symbolic of whatever is going on in that brilliant head of hers, or Nancy Pelosi, who's sort of always selecting her outfits in certain ways. And I can't help but say I am frustrated on one hand that we even have to be discussing it at all, and on the other hand, the choices that these women are making when there are choices to be made, because again, as you point out in your book, it's for men, it's usually sort of roll out of the shower, comb your hair if you comb it at all, and put on a grey or black suit or whatever. And, I guess I'm going to throw to you, should fashion not be discussed at all? Even when there's sort of considerable kind of calculation and thought behind it. What about Theresa May's shoes? You had that beautiful anecdote in the book where I think there was an intern or someone in the elevator with her who said, I like your shoes or something, and she, well, I'm here because I realized I could sort of connect with you through your shoes. So, I'm gonna throw it back at you and say, come on, I know it's enormous, but should we not just accept it and run with it? Thoughts?
Yeah. I'm glad you've thrown it back at me, because this is complicated in a whole series of ways, and different women make different choices, and that's certainly what we found in the book. Some women, and I'm one of them, took the choice to say, look, I'm going to get a very standard look to try and close down commentary on my appearance, which was truly crazy. If you looked at any of the newspapers, the second day I was Prime Minister, the first full day I was Prime Minister, because you're sworn in on day one, the first full day I was Prime Minister, if you got the news footage, if you looked at any of the newspapers, it was all about the coat I wore, not what's she going to do in defence, what's she going to do for the economy, not what's she going to do for health, education, etc. We ended up joking about it as the jacket that divided a nation. It was just crazy. And so out of experiences like that, I came to the conclusion that I was going to get a pretty standard look. And people would talk about the standard look, and then really how long can you keep talking about it when it's essentially the same, and close down discussion of fashion. And other leaders have taken that strategy. Think of Chancellor Merkel. Every day she's going to come out in the dark pants and a coloured jacket every day. Hillary Clinton with her pantsuits, yes, different colours, but every day she was going to effectively look pretty much the same. And yet there are some women that we interviewed who, love fashion. Theresa May loves fashion. And there were young women, who got interested in politics because of her fashion. I'm not saying that either of those choices is right or wrong. I think they're very individual choices and women should make them. But there's a level below it which is beyond commentary and into judgment that I think we've got to understand. So if a Theresa May wants to, fashion's a bit of a hobby for her, so she makes fashionable choices, people talk about her fashionable choices, I think that's fine. But there's a level below, which is we tend to judge women on appearance in a way we don't judge men. And so if we look, for example, at, the current UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who's famous for his, mop hair and being often a little bit dishevelled. And, that's him, that's Boris. And it's talked about, but it's talked about through the lens of being kind of a bit interesting, kind of a bit eccentric. But no one takes it to the next stage, and it would be taken to the next stage for a woman who routinely appeared with hair all over the place and a little bit dishevelled. People would take it to the next stage and say, she's a bit not up to it. She's a bit flighty, fragile, disorganised, slovenly, even some, ruder words than that would be used. A woman like that can't be a leader. And Theresa May, when I put that proposition to her in the book, said, that's right, the Tory party probably wouldn't select a woman like that for Parliament. So if we keep it in this, kind of fun, what brooch has Madeleine Albright got on today, I think nothing wrong with that at all. But if it descends into this, I'm going to make a judgment about the character of that woman because of the clothes on her body, that's when it gets dangerous. And that's what we've certainly got to, go straight at. And if someone is saying in any piece, we know something about Kamala Harris's honesty, integrity, thought processes, essential character, courage, because she's worn a jacket like this or shoes like that, that's the level that we've got to cut out and cut through.
Thank you. I totally agree. I have about 5 seconds left and 50 questions that I still want to ask you. So I'm going to ask you, I'm just sort of rooting through my list. And I think I want to end on this note. It's unfortunately a question that probably deserves a very long answer, but maybe you can give it a short answer. I want to just talk about policy. I want to think about things like feminist foreign policy, gender councils. Governments around the world have tried with varying degrees of success and commitment to integrate gender and women's issues into their work. Not all, of course, not all. And I wonder what in your mind is a successful model for incorporating gender into what a government does?
I think you've got to bake it in at the centre. Governments, when they're doing policies, have things baked in at the centre. They'll do the economic analysis, for example. No one will adopt a policy without having run the economic analysis over it. We need the same centering of the gender analysis. So you don't have all of government here and the women's portfolio over here. You bake it in and nothing gets done, whether it's in, defence or foreign policy or healthcare or education or economic reskilling. Nothing gets done unless it's been looked at and analysed for its impact on gender.
Okay, and my final question, please don't hate me for this. Last year was a nightmare in every sense. This year is not looking so great either. Bearing in mind that no one would ever, ever, ever have wished this pandemic upon us. It's been awful at every single level. But are you glad or sad that you aren't currently Prime Minister of Australia?
Oh, look, I think, when you've got the taste for politics, you always think, it's better to be there than to not be there. But I do think this is an incredibly hard time for leaders around the world. And, we've got to be careful in our judgments of them based on that. It's very tough to say, why didn't everybody act perfectly in such an, event such as this? In that sense, I'm kind of relieved to not be there. I also think for lots of people who went into politics with an agenda of I definitely want to do this, this and this, and then they get handed the pandemic to manage, it sort of crowds out the reforms, the big reforms that they wanted to do. And so we've got to be understanding about that in the cycle of politics too. I'm glad I got to govern when I did, and I wish leaders who are grappling with this crisis now well.
That's such a great point. It's sort of, this isn't what I signed up for. And on the other hand, maybe I can do unexpected things that I never thought I could do because we've been handed this crisis. Julia, thank you so much for your wonderful time, very early for you. We're so grateful. I'm going to just quickly hand it back to Sophie, who's going to conclude the session. Sophie?
Thank you. A huge thank you to Honourable Julia Gillard and to you, Francesca, for such an exchange. You are not able to see what's happening behind the scene, but we have more than 500 participants having a very rich conversation on the platform. So thank you for triggering it. Maybe I'll just highlight a few points. I particularly love how you highlighted the traits that makes a leader successful in a crisis, and it's certainly not ultra macho swagger. You also, interestingly, I think you reiterated the essential moral case for equally enabling women to lead, and not just on the basis of their ability to outperform men, and really a call to give women a fair chance all the time. Though you didn't fail either to highlight women's unique ability to combine strength and empathy as something to build on from this crisis. And it's really sounded a bit like uniting power and purpose, a theme for this year, the Women's Forum, and along with it, a commitment to unlock it for a she recovery for all. So thank you also for your inspiring candor about the sheer joy and the challenges of leadership. As hard and grueling and difficult as it is, you would do it all over again in a heartbeat, and I will savor that. And then lastly, when you said it's not special class of superhero woman who can do it, it's women exactly like you and like all of them who were today on this conversation. And then maybe the fact that it even gets better as the more we do it. I think we should really end on that note of optimism. So thank you. Thank you again. And if you want to share, participate in this great conversation around, the recording will be available soon on this page and on the Women's Forum YouTube channel. And of course, I would be remiss to not mention your book, Julia, Women and Leadership, Real Lives and Real Lesson, whose North American edition comes out today, February the 2nd. So as a reminder, you can always share your thoughts, and clearly there were lots to be shared from the conversation we saw on the platform using the hashtag, in her words, Women's Forum and She Recovery. Thank you again, everyone, for your participation, for your engagement. Stay tuned for our upcoming session with In Her Words later this year. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.